Oh, good. Yeah, thank you.
I
Um,
just started it. I'm sorry.
that's okay. We got Eliot born. It's okay. So he's back in Harvard. He was working, eventually uh, given a scholarship to go to Merton College, Oxford in 1914, but he was only there for 1 year. At that time, he met Ezra Pound, the poet Ezra Pound, who became a close friend and also a major influence. Eventually, when Eliot published The Wasteland in 1922, he dedicated it to Il Miglior Fabbro, which means the better craftsman, because Eliot had sent a manuscript of The Wasteland to Pound, and Pound did some pretty severe editing on it.
Really?
And that is the published version that we have. There's a really interesting book called The Facsimile Wasteland that came out pretty long time ago that shows all the changes, all the Pound's comments, also Eliot's wife's comments, which at one point made a really good change, but so on. So he stayed at Merton College only 1 year. He really didn't like Oxford, although he could admit that he was surrounded by a lot of really intelligent people. In 1915, he published his first book of poems, which is called The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. Another,
17.
I had 15 that I looked up, but
Okay, maybe.
yeah. He was in his early 20s when he wrote The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. So as you can tell, he's, adopting a persona of a much, much more world weary and much older man for some of this early work. In 1919, he published a book of essays called The Sacred Wood. And this has it has several of his most important essays in it, two of which I'll mention as we fly by. The first is Tradition and the Individual Talent, and the second is called Hamlet and His Problems. In 1920, Eliot published a book of poetry called Ara vos Prec, which means pray for us. And this has the poem Gerontian in it. By this time, let me back up a little bit. He had married in 1915. He married a woman named Vivian Haywood. This was a completely miserable marriage for both of them. Why they got married, is a good question. He married her. They were married until they separated in 1932, officially separated in 1933, remained married until she died in 1947. Although they had not lived apart for a long time, he only saw her once all those years of separation. Her brother had her institutionalized in 1938, where she remained until her death. So it was a miserable marriage because, first of all, they just weren't suited to each other. Secondly, they both had really severe health problems. Um, she was neurasthenic. She had all kinds of sort of mental difficulties, all kinds of physical difficulties. Eliot himself was, really gloomy, morose, drinking sometimes quite heavily. Virginia Woolf commented of him that he was the only man she ever knew who habitually wore a four-piece suit, which I think is a really great comment. They were good friends. He was hanging out with that bunch of people, Virginia Woolf and Leonard Woolf and the other Bloomsbury people, but and incredibly learned,
Beautiful.
incredibly intelligent, but just not
This
happy.
is pants and jacket.
In 1916, I'm sort of flying around in time here, he completed his dissertation, which is on, quote, knowledge and experience in the philosophy of F.H. Bradley. But by this time, he was living in England. By this time, World War I made it impossible for him to return to Harvard for the oral examination. So he never actually took his PhD degree. He was writing poetry during this time. He began for a while working as a school teacher. And then in 1917, he began working at Lloyd's Bank in London. He was living in London, and that became his major home for the whole, last decades of his life. He began as a director in publication for excuse me, Faber and Faber in 1925. During the Lloyds Bank years, Ezra Pound started a fundraiser for Eliot because Ezra Pound said that Eliot was, sort of languishing in misery, working in a bank, and that this was the greatest poet of our time. So Eliot did work at the bank for some years, then began working as a director in publication, and that's where he remained. In 1922, after working on the poem in fragmentary form for many years, Eliot put together the fragments and published The Wasteland. He also went through a period of real mental distress. He was in a sanatorium for a while, and when you read the final section of The Wasteland, you will see this was written pretty much in one fell swoop while at the sanatorium, and you will see the incredible urgency and passion and suffering that's in that section, and then also eventually a kind of winning through to a very, very tentative sort of resolution. In 1927, Eliot converted to Anglicanism and became a British citizen. He had been going through a period of religious conversion for some time. He had been meeting with, Anglican priests and so on. And he wrote a really beautiful series of poems leading up to and then after his conversion. Among them, we'll look at Ash Wednesday later, and we'll look at The Journey of the Magi. These are two of them. So he became, as he said, a classicist in literature, a royalist in politics, and Anglo-Catholic in religion. Very conservative, right? He started working on the great, great, great series of poems that became four quartets. The first of these, Burnt Norton, was published in 1936. The second, East Coker, in 1940. So this is after the war had begun, and the war is present in these poems. Dry Salvages is published in 1941. And this is the poem that takes us back to his Mississippi River roots in St. Louis. And then the final poem, Little Gidding, in 1942. They were published together as four quartets in 1943. Um, so any questions so far? Because I kept flying around back and forth with dates. Yeah,
I'm
Douglas.
Was
sorry.
he
Oh, sorry.
was he meeting any kind of financial success from his publishing, or was this not part of it?
I don't think so. Not that much.
He
He
did
he
okay.
did okay. Yeah, and he was working as a publisher. He became a director in publications. He lived a pretty Tony life, I would say, you know, but he was not. And then by later in his life, he became, well, after winning the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1948, he became famous, very famous on both sides of the Atlantic. And I have heard that at one point when he returned for a reading tour in the United States, they had to use the football stadium at the University of Minnesota because his audience was so huge, you know. But the early responses to his poetry were wildly mixed. I mean, when he first published Proof Rock, people are like, what? You know, what is this? When he first published The Wasteland, ditto. So people who were literary and people who were at the cutting edge of the kind of literary and artistic avant-garde recognized that this was truly a game changer in the history of poetry in English. But most people who were just used to reading poetry or who had perhaps Georgian tastes in poetry or romantic taste in poetry, you know, just absolutely didn't have any way of recognizing what he was doing or how this was going to change everything, you know.
It was worse than that. J.C. Squire, who was a very minor poet but had a lot of power as a critic, said, as far as he could tell, The Wasteland was written in double Dutch, and it wouldn't have mattered if it had. An Oxford Don under the pseudonym of Myra Buttle wrote a parody of The Wasteland, which is a really pretty poor parody. Eliot could appreciate good parodies of his work, especially one called Charred Whitlow that is very funny. But this is really, dumb and kind of Philistine.
Yeah.
Um, and a writer named H.M. Tomlinson has a character in a novel discussing a poet who is pretty clearly based on Eliot. And a character says, sing a song of mockery, is it? Is that the latest? It was a very surprising book, but it smelled like the dissection of bad innards. So it was a very kind of violent reaction against him on the part of a lot of established
Yeah.
critics and writers.
Yeah.
To his credit, the just like the Impressionists, all the arts have gotten bad reviews when they do something different. And a couple of one technical thing first. You mentioned Ash Wednesday. I didn't previously boot that up. Can you
That's
tell?
okay.
And you mentioned one other one too.
The Journey of the Magi. I am slow getting all this together. There's installments that are going to be coming.
Well,
Okay.
I'm not. I'm not. I just want to be prepared that I'm not
Yeah, yeah,
for
yeah.
this.
Yeah.
What was the second one? I'm sorry.
It's called The Journey of the Magi, but I'm going to send you links to that.
Oh, okay. All right. So
Yeah,
you
I'm working on all these links.
okay?
Okay.
What one other thing? I did have a question about why do you think they did get married if the marriage was so miserable? What's your personal feeling about it?
Well, Elliot, first of all, I would never be able to fully understand T.S. Eliot's psychology because my
Uh,
temperament is so different, even though I did want to marry him. He was in love with an American woman named Emily Hale, but he moved back to England. He did not see her for over 20 years. She ended up teaching at Scripps College, by the way. And after the letters were finally made available in 2020, people did scholarship on this, like this romance that never really came to be. So he was back in England and he just wanted a wife. He just wanted a woman, you know? Yes, Leslie.
Excuse me. I read last night that Ezra Pound, he was getting all this pressure from his family to return to Harvard, and he didn't want to. Ezra Pound told him if he got married secretly, then neither family could force him to go back to America. And the other thing was that he told somebody he was tired of being a virgin.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. I mean, he said,
it might not have been well thought out.
I really need a woman in my life, you know? So he got a woman in his life. But also, she was sparky. It's like this is during the Flappy era. She was a good dancer. She was really close to Bertrand Russell, with whom she may have had an affair. Um, but she was a kind of, I suppose, on the outward appearance, kind of a charmer, She's kind of pretty, if you see a picture of her. But it's just that they were just like so totally, totally badly suited to each other.
But
This,
he also said he admired her because she had a mind more like a man. So I thought that was it because he didn't think much of women generally from what I've read.
yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. Yeah, Douglas.
Um, in the, it's kind of a minor thing, but in the movie Midnight in Paris,
Yeah.
um, which is I highly recommend. But anyway, there's this moment where a car comes down the road and picks up the protagonist, and the protagonist is a writer, and the guy in the car introduced himself as Thomas Eliot, and and the protagonist really basically flips out because he's can't believe that he's in the presence of T.S. Eliot.
Yeah. 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 So I want to look at, since Eliot had such a huge effect on the study of literature and the criticism of literature all during the 20th century and even into the 21st century to some extent. I wanted to look briefly at tradition and the individual talent, this essay, and also Hamlet and his problems. So remember, these are essays written by somebody who's still very young, and they are incredibly brilliant. But they also are kind of throwing down the gauntlet at the whole tradition of Romanticism in poetry, which Eliot effectively undid. So Eliot says, this is an essay that's really worth reading completely. But Eliot says, tradition is a matter of wide significance. It cannot be inherited. And if you want it, you must obtain it by great labor. It involves, in the first place, the historical sense, which we may call nearly indispensable to anyone who would continue to be a poet beyond his 25th year. And the historical sense involves a perception not only of the pastness of the past, but of its presence. The historical sense compels a man to write not merely with his own generation in his bones, but with a feeling that the whole of literature of Europe, from Homer and within it, the whole of the literature of his own country, has a simultaneous existence and composes a simultaneous order. This is a tall call. This historical sense is what makes a writer traditional. And at the same time, it is what makes a writer most acutely conscious of his place in time, of his own contemporaneity. No poet, no artist of any art has his complete meaning alone. His significance, his appreciation, is the appreciation of his relation to the dead poets and artists. And then skipping a little bit, what happens when a new work of art is created is something that happens simultaneously to all the works of art which preceded it. The existing monuments form an ideal order among themselves, which is modified by the introduction of the really new work of art among them. Somebody had this explained to me long ago as you imagine all these great writers from Homer to the recent past sitting around a huge dinner table. And then along comes C.S. Eliot and he takes a seat and everybody has to move over a little bit. It's like it changes the configuration of the whole table, you know? The existing order is complete before the new work arrives. For order to persist after the supervention of novelty, the whole existing order must be, if ever so slightly, altered. And then he says later on, someone said, and I really like this, someone said, the dead writers are remote from us because we know so much more than they did. Precisely, and they are that which we know. So Shakespeare didn't know that we would exist, but we know that Shakespeare existed. And then later on, Eliot talks about what he calls the extinction of the self in poetry. He says, the progress of an artist is a continual self-sacrifice and the continual extinction of personality. There remains to define this process of depersonalization and its relation to the sense of tradition. It is in this depersonalization that art may be said to approach the condition of science. I therefore invite you to consider as a suggestive analogy the action which takes place when a bit of finely filiated platinum is introduced into a chamber containing oxygen and sulfur dioxide. What happens, he says, is that they create sulfurous acid. He says the more perfect the artist, the more completely separate in him will be the man who suffers and the mind which creates. The more perfectly will the mind digest and transmute the passions which are its material. Later on, my meaning is that the poet has not a personality to express, but a particular medium, which is only a medium and not a personality, in which impressions and experiences combine in peculiar and unexpected ways. And then he says, Um, Poetry is not a turning loose of emotion, but an escape from emotion. It is not the expression of personality, but an escape from personality. But of course, only those who have personality and emotions know what it means to want to escape from these things. I really like that, you know. Um, and he talks about significant emotion. That is the emotion which has its life in the poem and not in the history of the poet. And then later, I'm going to look briefly at Hamlet and his problems. What Eliot says the play Hamlet lacks, and this is, you know, you can argue with this. Eliot says it lacks an objective correlative. Hamlet lacks an objective correlative. And here is how he defines that. In other words, a set of objects, a situation, a chain of events, which shall be the formula of that particular emotion, such that when the external facts which must terminate in sensory experience are given, the emotion is immediately evoked. So I mention this because when we look at Prufrock, which we're going to do now, we're going to look at this existence of the objective correlative or many objective correlatives, which give us a sense of Prufrock and of Prufrock's situation without in any sense you know, reflecting the internal life of the person who wrote this poem. That is to say, of course, the internal life is there, but it is transmuted by means of poetry into something very different from a simple personal expression. So we have the ability to listen to Eliot reading Prufrock, but can somebody, Douglas, can you click on that? And you'll hear what Eliot sounds like. Very dry. Not working? Well, we can have me reading Prufrock.
Douglas is mute.
Oh, you're mute, Douglas. You're mute. If you unmute, will it work? Unmute. Okay, he's saying it doesn't work.
No, I just not all together here.
That's okay. I think probably nobody's all together here. I think,
And
yeah,
before we move on, I have a couple of questions about that. The credit. First of all, did Eliot make up the phrase objective correlative, which
yeah,
we've all heard? That comes from him.
yeah,
Okay, I didn't know that.
yeah,
And secondly, the description of uh, maybe you could help me. It sounds like the essay, he talks about the difference between poetry is not the expression of the self. In fact, it's kind of like the separation from self or something like that. And I was reminded of what actors talk about. And there's the method acting where you're trying to inhabit. I'm not an actor, but inhabit, and draw on your own feelings. But yet, when you're acting, that's a different thing. And actors will have a different range of things that they think about this. And some of them think, oh, no, that's not acting is when you're completely divorced from you and you're just, you know what expressions will evoke what responses. And the second thing that occurs to me is in philosophy, if you remember, uh, the whole idea was to be objective until we got to the 19th century. And then it was, you have to live through all of these problems. And that
yeah.
was the whole theme of the 19th century. Do you want to comment on either of those things?
Yeah, sure. Well, the Romantics in poetry really stressed originality. And they stressed also personal experience, you know. So the Romantics, like Wordsworth and Keats, are writing very much out of their own experience to the extent that Wordsworth will date poems, you know. Um, and the Romantics are in reaction against and rebellion against 18th century thinking about rationalism the thinking that the mind is a tabula rasa. Wordsworth is the great poet of imagination, the great poet who believes that a baby is born with an indwelling nature, an indwelling imagination, that a baby is not merely a blank slate on whom experience is written, and that the
Is that in the
develop,
prelude?
yeah, that's the prelude, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, which you remember from Mulhauser, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so Eliot, as influenced by the French symbolists and also, by his own personality, is very much in rebellion against that, right? So Eliot is really one of the great figures of literary modernism. And modernism is obviously influenced by romanticism. Everything doesn't have clean breaks like that, but it's in reaction against this idea that the poet is, speaking from his own experience or her own experience, and the idea that emotion recollected in tranquility, as Wordsworth says, is the source of poetry. Eliot is much more polymath, much more intellectual, much more ironic in the way he wants poetry to be created and to sound. Does that make sense, kind of?
Uh, I'm not sure. It's not that you weren't articulate. I'm just not sure I'm capable of quite grokking the whole thing. I mean, I get the themes that are being played here. Uh,
Hmm. Well, let's look at how it sounds. Let's look at how it works. Okay.
okay, yeah.
So, first of all, is anybody in the audience, is like calling for a doctor? Can anybody read Italian better than I can?
Doing it.
Okay.
I do have, I think, Proofrock booted up. I can find it if you want to look at it. And do you want to do that?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay.
Okay. And then, yeah, would you please?
Yeah.
Peter's going to read the Italian. He does it really so much better than I.
S'io credesse che mia risposta fosse a persona che mai tornasse al mondo, questa fiamma staria senza più scosse. Ma perciò che giammai di questo fondo non torno vivo alcun, s'io odo il vero, senza tema d'infamia ti rispondo.
Thanks, honey. So that was Ash Wednesday that you hooked up, Tony. I'm going to just start reading and we can join in. Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky like a patient etherized upon a table. Let us go through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless nights in one-night cheap hotels and sawdust restaurants with oyster shells. Streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent to lead you to an overwhelming question. Oh, do not ask, what is it? Let us go and make our visit. In the room, the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. The yellow fog that rubs its back upon the window panes, the yellow smoke that rubs its muzzle on the window panes, licked its tongue into the corners of the evening, lingered upon the pools that stand in drains, let fall upon its back the soot that falls from chimneys, slipped by the terrace, made a sudden leap, and seeing that it was a soft October night, curled once about the house and fell asleep. And indeed, there will be time for the yellow smoke that slides along the street, rubbing its back upon the window panes. There will be time to prepare a face to meet the faces that you meet. There will be time to murder and create, and time for all the works and days of hands that lift and drop a question on your plate. Time for you and time for me, and time yet for 100 indecisions and for 100 visions and revisions before the taking of a toast and tea. In the room, the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. And indeed, there will be time to wonder, do I dare? And do I dare? Time to turn back and descend the stair with a bald spot in the middle of my hair. They will say, how his hair is growing thin. My morning coat, my collar mounting firmly to the chin, my necktie rich and modest, but asserted by a simple pin. They will say, but how his arms and legs are thin. Do I dare disturb the universe? In a minute, there is time for decisions and revisions, which a minute will reverse. For I have known them all already, known them all, have known the evenings, mornings, afternoons. I have measured out my life with coffee spoons. I know the voices dying with a dying fall beneath the music from a farther room. So how should I presume? And I have known the eyes already, known them all, the eyes that fix you in a formulated phrase. And when I'm formulated, sprawling on a pin, when I'm pinned and wriggling on a wall, then how should I begin to spit out all the butt ends of my days and ways? And how should I presume? And I have known the arms already, known them all, arms that are braceleted and white and bare, but in the lamplight downed with light brown hair. Is it perfume from a dress that makes me so digress? Arms that lie along a table or wrap about a shawl. And how should I presume? Oh, and should I then presume? And how should I begin? Shall I say, I have gone at dusk through narrow streets and watched the smoke that rises from the pipes of lonely men in shirt sleeves leaning out of windows? I should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas. And the afternoon, the evening sleep so peacefully, smoothed by long fingers, asleep, tired, or it malingers, stretched on the floor here beside you and me. Should I, after tea and cakes and ices, have the strength to force the moment to its crisis? But though I've wept and fasted, wept and prayed, though I have seen my head grown slightly bald, brought in upon a platter, I am no prophet, and here's no great matter. I have seen the moment of my greatness flicker, and I have seen the eternal footman hold my coat and snicker. And in short, I was afraid. And would it have been worth it after all, after the cups, the marmalade, the tea, among the porcelain, among some talk of you and me? Would it have been worthwhile to have bitten off the matter with a smile, to have squeezed the universe into a ball, to roll it towards some overwhelming question, to say, I am Lazarus, come back from the dead, come back to tell you all. I shall tell you all. If one, settling a pillow by her head, should say, that is not what I meant at all. That is not it at all. And would it have been worth it after all? Would it have been worthwhile after the sunsets and the dooryards and the sprinkled streets, after the novels, after the teacups, after the skirts that trail along the floor, and this and so much more? It is impossible to say just what I mean. But as if a magic lantern through the nerves in patterns on a screen, would it have been worthwhile if one, settling a pillow or throwing off a shawl and turning toward the window, should say, that is not it at all. That is not what I meant at all. No, I am not Prince Hamlet, nor was meant to be. Am an attendant lord, one that will do to swell a progress, start a scene or two, advise the prince, no doubt an easy tool, deferential, glad to be of use, politic, cautious, and meticulous, full of high sentence, but a bit obtuse, at times, indeed, almost ridiculous, almost at times, the fool. I grow old, I grow old. I shall wear the bottoms of my trousers rolled. Shall I part my hair behind? Do I dare to eat a peach? I shall wear white flannel trousers and walk upon the beach. I have heard the mermaids singing, each to each. I do not think that they will sing to me. I have seen them riding seaward on the waves, combing the white hair of the waves blown back when the wind blows the water white and black. We have lingered in the chambers of the sea by sea girls wreathed with seaweed, red and brown, till human voices wake us and we drown. Prufrock is 1917. I was wrong. This book, Prufrock and Other Observations, is dedicated to somebody who was a dear friend of Eliot's, Jean Verdenal, 1889 to 1915, who died in the Dardanelles. And there's an epigraph for him from the Purgatorio, which says, in Italian, I'm not going to read it, but it says, now canst thou comprehend the measure of the love which warms me toward thee, when I forget our nothingness and treat shades as a solid thing. So there's also a really important epigraph, which Peter read you in Italian, to the love song of Geoffrey Prufrock. There's so much to say about this poem. It's like it could take an hour. This is from Guido da Montefeltro, from Canto 27 in the Inferno. So Dante, is passing through the Malebolges, and he questions Guido, why are you here? And this is what Guido replies. He says, if I thought my answer were to one who ever could return to the world, this flame should shake no more. But since none ever did return alive from this depth, if what I hear be true, without fear of infamy, I answer thee. So think about this as an opening gambit. The epigraph for this poem is spoken by somebody who says to the poet, if I thought you were ever going to get out of here to take my story to the world, I wouldn't tell you my story. But since none ever did return alive from here, if what I hear be true, without fear of infamy, I answer you. So the poet who's writing this poem is down in that Malebolgia with the speaker. And yet he's giving us not Guido's story, but his story. Now, the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock says it's a great, great, great title. And what it tells us is it's a love song. Like the love song of Tristan and Isolde, the love song of Romeo and Juliet, the love song of this and this and this, a billion, rock music, pop stars. Eliot really liked rock music and pop stars. But this is a love song sung by somebody named J. Alfred Prufrock. One thing we know is that Prufrock was the name of a wholesale furniture business in St. Louis in the early 20th century. And people who call themselves J. Alfred, right, rather than, John A. or Jeremiah A. J. Alfred, that's like, somebody whose collar is mounted firmly to the chin, right? That's a would-be businessman's name. So this is the love song of somebody named J. Alfred Prufrock, which is to say already it's going to be a really different kind of love song. And then you've got this strange, strange epigraph. And then you've got the imitation at the beginning of the poem. So this is a dramatic monologue. It's a poem spoken by a speaker. We talked about dramatic monologues with Frost, how we are, you know, an interloper, we're an eavesdropper on this poem that's being spoken to somebody. But in this case, it's also, of course, being spoken to us as readers of the poem. Let us go then, you and I. When the evening is spread out across the sky, my professor said that's such a romantic second line, but he said modern poetry enters with the third line, like a patient etherized upon a table. Blah, So already there's this undercutting of that romantic expectation, right? Let us go then, you and I. Who's he talking to? Some lady, some love. When the evening is spread out across this against the sky, you know, like a patient etherized upon a table, dead, inert. Already this ironic undercutting of the whole damn shebang. So we've got so much going on here in the epigraph, the title, and the first three lines of this poem, and it just continues to be this really, really complicated texture of. I mean, sure, this poem is deeply personal, but that personal agony is also being fragmented and crystallized and shown to us through all these different ways that make it a very, very different kind of texture. Let us go through certain half-deserted streets. Here's your first objective correlative. The muttering retreats of restless nights in one-night cheap hotels and sawdust restaurants with oyster shells, streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent to lead you to an overwhelming question. All of Eliot's great poetry is asking an overwhelming question or trying to ask an overwhelming question. And that question changes from Prufrock through four quartets, but you'll see that is a leitmotif for him. What is the overwhelming question? What is the question that my soul is asking? Oh, do not ask, what is it? Already, again, this undercutting. It's like, I don't know. Let us go and make our visit. Now, where are they going to go? Where are they? This is an image of low life, the streets, the sawdust restaurants with oyster shells, and indeed, when Eliot was a student at Harvard, there's a brilliant biography of him by Lyndall Gordon called T.S. Eliot, The Early Years. And she talks about how when he was a student at Harvard, he would just wander the streets of Boston. And he would see, for instance, the lonely men in shirt sleeves leaning out of windows, smoking their pipes. And he would wander these maze-like alleys and byways, but yet he himself, his own social class at the same time, he was going to tea parties, he was wearing suits, he was studying Sanskrit, philosophy, literature, he was editing the Harvard Advocate, So there's this double thing going on here. In the room, the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. Those are some of the most famous lines in English poetry. It's like, who are these women? He's not going to tell you. What is this room? Is this where he's trying to go to? Is this, high society ladies chit-chatting over cups of tea? Or some people have said, okay, this is like, high-class prostitutes. Like, where are we? Well, we're not there yet. And then
And
yeah,
the if I may, the image that you just described of him basically living in a very high class intellectual society, but then slumming it by going through the streets. Can you help me with the Shakespearean play where the king says, "I'm a Corinthian lad"? What is that from?
Peter would know, but he's asleep.
Oh,
Not asleep.
I'm awake.
because that's what happens. The Hal, I think it is.
Oh, that's Henry the Fourth, part one, right?
What is it?
I'm a Corinthian lad. Somebody slumming who's of royal station. That's
Oh,
that's
yeah.
Prince Hal.
They call Hal a Corinthian.
Okay, yeah,
A
that's
good
Yeah,
lad.
and anyway, I have a background story about the use of the word Corinthian, but as far as I know, Uh, that's not the typical meaning of the word Corinthian, and this gets us off the. But the Corinthians were libertines. They weren't known as being. Anyway, the point is that the same theme is explored there. That I'm a high class guy, but I'm going to go down and slum it and hang out with the ordinary people. I'm sorry I interrupted.
No, that's okay. It's just that Eliot was not having lady contacts. He was just wandering around.
Well, I don't think Hal was either. I don't think it was that. It was that he wanted to establish that he could drink with the common man.
Right,
That's what he says.
right, right. Yeah, absolutely. So, a couple comments, okay? Hugh Kenner wrote really wonderfully on T.S. Eliot in a book called T.S. Eliot, The Invisible Poet. And what Hugh Kenner says about Prufrock, about this poem, he says, Prufrock is a name and a voice. Prufrock is a zone of consciousness through which we pass, which is, getting back to this idea that Eliot is making his own self invisible into this zone of consciousness. Prufrock is a name, and we talked about the name. Prufrock is a voice. This voice is incredibly learned, incredibly skillful. This is, I think, just absolutely beautiful poetry. It's also funny sometimes, you know, um, through tea and cakes and ices, force the moment to its crisis. This is almost like dance hall patter, like that. A lot of it's in iambic pentameter, but it changes out. A lot of it rhymes. A lot of it doesn't. Eliot is formally writing such a changeable and fluid kind of poetry. It's a poetry that Eliot worked on. He worked on this poem for years as a very, very young man and, put it together eventually. So it's a poem that's made in sections. It's got some turning points, but it's not just one long sequential narrative like Frost's long narrative poems. It tells a narrative, but the question remains, or the question arises, does Prufrock ever leave his room? And I think it's fair to say that by the end of the poem, we have to conclude that Prufrock is down in that Melibolgia. He's not getting out because he talks himself out of going anywhere. He wants to go. He sets out on a journey. He imagines this journey. But then instantly he starts equivocating, and indeed there will be time. Look at that section. Time. Time for 100 visions and revisions before the taking of toast and tea. In the room, the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo, and indeed there will be time to wonder, do I dare and do I dare? Time to turn back and descend the stair. Get halfway up the stairway, turn around. Oh no, going down. And then imagining, and this is the great poem about self-consciousness in the English tradition. It's the greatest shy guy poem that anybody ever wrote, in my opinion. Peter said to me, is there a competitor? And I couldn't think of one. So this is somebody who imagines himself going down a stairway, imagining people standing above him, looking at his bald spot, right? They will say, how his hair is growing thin. My morning coat, my collar mounting firmly to the chin, as if it's got to hold his head up. My necktie rich and modest, but asserted by a simple pin. They will say, but how his arms and legs are thin. And then this sort of mock heroical, and do I dare disturb the universe? I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. In a minute, there is time for decisions and revisions, which a minute will reverse. And then he starts turning toward the past. For I've known them all already, known them all. Have known the evenings, mornings, afternoons. Great line, have measured at my life with coffee spoons. You know, tea party after tea party, chit chat after chit chat. This incredible boredom, incredible ennui, accidia, staleness. It's exhaustion, longing to break through to something else. I've known the eyes already, known them all. The question arises, well, no, you haven't, but you feel as if you have. I've known the arms already, known them all, which is to say, what? I've known every woman that exists. But in fact, if you feel like that, you haven't known any of them. But that's the feeling that pervades. And then you get this great line, should I then presume? Should I then presume? And how should I begin? And now here's what I think are the central lines of the whole poem. Remember this young person wandering around the streets, imagining or looking at the lonely men in shirt sleeves leaning out of windows. Shall I say, I have gone at dusk to narrow streets and watched the smoke that rises from the pipes of lonely men in shirt sleeves leaning out of windows. That would be to speak out. If he goes where the women are and says, this is what I've seen. This is who I am. This is where I've been. Then maybe there can be a crack in that facade. But instantly, these great lines. And notice the ellipses, boop, 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 you know, that's pointing out this section is super important here. I should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas. Another brilliant objective correlative. And another time, he's looking up at the men and he imagines them looking down on him. And he imagines himself like a little crab scuttling along the street. So this just agony of being in a mortal body, you know? And the afternoon, the evening sleep so peacefully. Should I, after tea and cakes and ices, have the strength to force the moment to its crisis? And the whole thing starts just moving toward its ending, this inevitable ending of not having happened, not gonna happen. I am no prophet, and here's no great matter. I used to be crying so hard every time I read this poem that I couldn't finish it. You know, I would get down to, I do not think that they will sing to me, and I would be blubbering. I didn't know there was another stanza after that. It's a heartbreaking poem. I've seen the eternal footman hold my coat and snicker. The eternal footman, you know, again, this tea party world, the footman ushering you out of the party, but also death standing behind you. That really looks like something, doesn't it? And in short, I was afraid, you know? Again, would it have been worth it after all to squeeze the universe into a ball? That comes from Marvel's poem to his coy mistress, which is a Carpe Diem poem. To say, I'm Lazarus come from the dead. Again, this mention of the overwhelming question. I've come to tell you all. I've come to tell you all. But the lady, whoever she is, just says, that's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. So this total, failure to connect. And then the ellipses again. No, I am not Prince Hamlet. I mean, even Hamlet, my God, he had it bad enough. But this isn't even Hamlet. This isn't even the prince. I am an attendant lord. When it will do to swell the progress, start a scene or two. Advise the prince, no doubt an easy tool. Deferential, glad to be of use. Full of high sentence, but a bit obtuse. At times, indeed, almost ridiculous. Almost at times the fool. And then the final decrescendo. I grow old. Again, most famous lines in English poetry. I grow old. I grow old. I shall wear the bottoms of my trousers rolled. Shall I part my hair behind? Do I dare to eat a peach? Which are both heartbreaking and funny. It's like, what do you mean, do you dare to eat a peach? It's what's gonna like give you indigestion? You could break it to what? But it's
It's
brilliant.
messy.
It's messy, true, juicy and messy. Ah, so yes, like the bodies of those who shall not be named. I shall wear white flannel trousers. What a thing to walk in the beach wearing white flannel trousers and walk along the beach. I have heard the mermaids singing each to each. This is his lingering heroism. He at least has heard the mermaids. Like Ulysses, he's heard the sirens. But then I do not think that they will sing to me. And then this beautiful ending, evoking the mermaids, riding seaward on the waves, and evoking, notice he says now, we, not I. He's pulling us into the poem. We have lingered in the chambers of the sea, by seagulls wreathed with seaweed red and brown, till human voices wake us and we drown. So this we, lingering in fantasy, lingering in desire that doesn't go anywhere, and then called back to, brute reality by the human voices, which send us down to the bottom of the ocean again. So as I say, it's a heartbreaking poem, but it's also, I think it's made so beautiful because it's so, number one, so beautiful, and number two, so witty. It's just it's just brilliant all the way through. There's not a single false step. And it's a pleasure. I mean, I must have read this poem 500 times by now in my life. I love it every single time. It just flows off the brain, do you know? And there's something new to see every single time you look at it. Um, you can take notes after notes after notes, like I'll show you what my first page of my book looks like. This is my beloved book that my mom gave me when I was 17 for Christmas. And that's the first page, and it doesn't get better. It's like just notes and notes and notes. Um, and I've loved it ever since I was 17 when I planned to go marry T.S. Eliot and make him happy. Yes, go ahead, Otis.
Yeah,
Um,
sorry. I read the essay before I read the poem again, and I just cannot accept his concept of the poet losing himself in the poem when we've talked for half an hour about all the things in his house in his life that inform this poem. So I I find a disconnect there.
they're transmuted. Peter, you want to talk?
Yeah, another way to look at that impersonality, which I do think Eliot overstates, is the way the critic F.R. Leavis, who was Eliot's champion at Cambridge, talked about the difference between literature in which experience matters because it matters, and the literature in which experience matters because it happened to me. And I think that's maybe a clearer distinction. We tend to feel that anything that happens to us is important, but that's one aspect of the impersonality, that the experience itself matters. And yes, it also happened to me, but that's not the main point.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. It's also that there's a distance between um, the person who writes the poem and the finished poem. And Eliot talks about, wanting to escape from personality, right? But he says, of course, only those who have emotions know what it feels like to want to escape from them. So, if you can imagine a poet, I mean, I like a lot of the confessional poets, people like Sylvia Plath or Sharon Olds, who are just like right out there with this happened to me. This is my divorce. This is my love affair. This is my insanity. This is my abortion. This is my broken toe. Do you know what I mean? And that can be really powerful poetry. But Eliot's doing something really different here. He's creating this made structure, which is sort of like all the refracted, um, if you think of a what that's called, a disco ball, like all the different refracted facets of a disco ball, put together to create this structure, which is the poem. And we'll see that even more so in The Wasteland. Um, so yeah, I mean, it is a deeply personal poem, deeply personal. Um,
Anna's had her hand up for a long time.
who?
Anne. I mean Leslie. I'm sorry, not Anne. You're Anne.
I Leslie,
You're
please call me Leslie. Go ahead. Yes, Leslie.
Well, two things. One, I've also read this poem a lot of times, and this time I was thinking about the effect of starting it with that quote. Um, so we're in one of the circles of hell,
Yeah.
and he's in one of the circles of hell, and I kept seeing it's like he's sitting on this couch at a typical genteel, this is how you have to spend your afternoon. And the women are coming and going, talking of Michelangelo. And they're bringing in another plate of tea with marmalade. And you feel like you have seen
Yeah.
all those arms. You haven't seen them all, but you feel like it because your life has become so flat because none of it means anything and you can't escape. There is
Yeah.
there's no
Absolutely.
escape. So that's why it seems to me sort of like especially, I mean, even the cat, the winding through the labyrinth, but and the cat circling. I always wondered about the circling cat because he loved cats and that image of the yellow cat. But it's
Yeah.
circling and then it's just sort of wrapping itself around you and you're enclosed in this hell.
Yeah.
So that was one thing. The other thing is, I think that I really agree with Otis that, it's sort of ironic that he would say, that he's going, it's sort of like Joyce saying that the writer effaces himself out of existence. But of course, you can't. Recently, though, when I was attending a thing on Gerard Manley Hopkins, and it was sort of boring actually, and somebody was chatting back and forth, and they said that most modern poetry was prose selfies. And I think that when you read a poem that seems like a selfie, prose or not, that's the difference.
Yeah.
This hasn't got that kind of ego of this is important because it happened to me. But
Yeah.
when we read it, I think all those lines where we all go, oh, bingo, I know exactly what that feels like, even though I'm not a guy, and all of this stuff. I read certain lines and I say, yes, that's the human condition.
Yeah.
uh,
Absolutely.
I've got a Corinthian comment. That this is I'm more familiar with songwriting than I am with poetry, and uh, in country music, a big deal is that you have to have lived it
Yeah.
to write it. That's a big deal, and you got to be authentic, right? And one of those stories is Johnny Cash has a song which contains the line, "I shot a man in Reno just to see him watch him die," and he performed at San Quentin, and in the audience was a guy who really did go to prison, Merle Haggard, uh, who didn't write about being. Well, no, he wrote about that too. But anyway, that's the second comment is once I saw this discussion, it was Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, a bunch of country songwriters, very successful. And then also at the table was Vince Gill, who you couldn't call a lightweight. And they were all saying, yeah, I had a really hard scrabble beginning. My old man was a drunk and I was in and out of jail and all this stuff. And they were all telling these stories. And Vince Gill goes, well, I don't know. I had a pretty nice upbringing. My family was pretty, and it just cracked me up because these guys are all posing like the tough guys that have lived a tough life and know how to write it. And here's this guy that, oh no, I had a nice upbringing.
Yeah.
I
That's
just
really
thought it was
funny.
hilarious. Anyway, it's the disconnect between the artist and the person, or the
Yeah. Yeah. Other comments? Yeah, Barry.
You know, when Leslie mentioned Joyce, I thought about Joyce as you were reading this poem also, because it seemed like reminded me that Joyce is this highly intellectual person who chose to write this book, Ulysses, about this guy who was just a normal person who was living life at a very banal kind of level, you know, to sort of connect to some level of humanity. And it seemed like it felt like a that in Eliot's poem that Prufrock is this character that's sort of locked out of that social world in this very intellectual milieu, and he feels that disconnect, and he's trying to worrying about whether he'll ever be able to bridge that gap and feel those real emotions.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's even worse than being in the room with the women handing the tea around. It's that he can imagine that, and that's so exhausting for him that I don't think he ever leaves. I don't think he ever goes anywhere in this poem. I think this is a like a balloon that somebody forgot to tie the knot, and so it gets all blown up and then it just fizzles out. Do you know what I
I
mean?
think he's there. I agree with Leslie. He's had so many occasions, social occasions of along the line of tea parties, that whether he's there or not at the moment that he's talking, he really does know
Of course he
this
does.
world, but he can't get past it
Of course he
rather than
does.
that he can't get into it.
I'm not saying he hasn't been there. I'm saying that I don't think in a poem that starts out, let us go, then you and I, it sounds like you're going to actually go someplace.
Yeah, out of the tea party into the half deserted
No.
streets. That's what I
Oh,
think.
you think he's already in the Tea Party?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
I
I
think
don't think
it's like,
so. I
let's
think
go
he's in his
somewhere
room.
better than this.
Yeah, Leslie.
I just, I was curious about the let us go then, you and I, who that you and I is, because later on, when you've got among some talk of you and
Hmm.
me is not the same as the you and I don't think. The you and I is maybe the reader.
Yeah.
But the you and me, some talk of you and me is, I think the woman who's sitting on the couch with him, and he's looking at the light on the hair on her arms and all these great details. And his whole thing of, I love that, putting on the face to meet the faces that you meet.
Ew.
Everybody is playing, they're posing. That's what I mean about the selfie. They're all posing to present themselves to the world as being much more secure and part of the culture than they really are.
Yep.
He's afraid to come out from behind that mask.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that is one of the all-time great lines because that's what we all do all the time is put on a face to meet the faces that we meet, you know? Yeah, absolutely.
It
Other,
seems
go
it seems to be
ahead.
Deborah Bowen one time, a long time ago. We were sitting around a campfire. I'm not sure it was her, but I think it was, who said something to me that was a critical comment about how I changed my personality when I was talking to different people. I had to think about that. You wouldn't remember it, Deborah. It was probably less important to you than me. And my favorite thing I've learned so far is the idea of the poetry being the equivalent of our selfies.
Uh,
I love this metaphor.
it's an unfortunate thing to try to get past, speaking as somebody who writes selfies a lot of the time, but you hope that they'll become something not just that, you know? Yeah. So one way to look at you and I too, when I was little, I was fascinated by me, myself, and I, you know, the different ways that we can think of ourselves. And I've always thought that he was just trying to buck himself up. Let us go then, you and I, rather than actually talking to another person. But the point is, we don't know, and we're not going to know.
It seems to me that he wants to go somewhere, but he never goes anywhere in the poem. He thinks about it, but then he talks himself out of it all the way.
Exactly.
And at the beginning, he talks about a really important question, but we never learn what the question is.
Exactly. You're going to have to get to four quartets to find any kind of answer
Yeah.
to that. And I'm not kidding. I
Yeah.
mean, this is something that just runs like an artery through his poetry, this idea of, seeking an answer to the overwhelming question and not phrasing what that overwhelming question is. But I think that he finally finds the answer, which is for him by the end of Little Gidding, which is the fourth of the four quartets.
And I find a flaw towards the end of the thing. These mermaids are riding waves, but they're going out to sea. And as somebody who spent high school in Hawaii, I'm unaware of that being possible.
That's pretty good. Oh, so did you guys see there's otters that steal people's surfboards?
In Santa Cruz, yes.
That cracked me up. An
Yeah.
otter coming along and biting you in the heel and stealing your surfboard, that really is funny. And then sitting on it.
Sent
It's
that to
been going on for more than a year.
my granddaughter's a surfer in Santa Cruz, and I sent it to her. I said, watch out.
Really, I know. I just couldn't even believe that. Any
There,
other comments? Yeah.
well, that not about the poetry, but about animals doing stuff like that. For a year or two off of Portugal, uh, orcas have been attacking sailboat rudders
Yeah.
and disabling the boats, and nobody knows why. One possibility is that one baby may have gotten hurt by a boat, and so
Oh,
now they just want to revenge against all the boats that some family, some pod of orcas does. It's very nobody knows what it is though, and I'm not sure that I know what the otter is doing exactly, but certainly having fun can't be
I
ruled out.
I
Yeah.
know. I know. That's great. Well, thanks everybody. So I guess we're going to tackle I'm going to ask for an opinion. Sh Shall we look at the wasteland next time
Well, as opposed to what?
as opposed to starting and moving more slowly with Durante and then only getting partway through the wasteland?
I I'm big. I'd love to talk about the wasteland, but what do I know? You're the poet. You're the instructor. You decide.
Are you guys all okay with starting with the wasteland?
I'm okay, but I don't want to miss anything. Got some good stuff before that. I want to hear it.
It might be nice to sort of work our way up to it because I
That's
think
kind of what I'm thinking.
yeah,
Durant
I think
gives
there
a
are a lot
good
of things
start.
that would come before that would give us more of a background. So when we get to the wasteland, it's going to mean more.
It's also going to give you some time to read the wasteland because I have been, what's the word I want? What's the word I want?
I don't know.
Deleterious, deliquescent,
I don't
whatever.
know.
I've been slow in sending you these updates because my mind was just on this other stuff.
Dilatory.
Dilatory, thank you. I knew it wasn't deliquescent, but it started with a del start. Anyway, it gave you
Uh,
more time to get acquainted with the wasteland at your leisure,
well,
and but
just so I would appreciate uh, knowing so I can get set up right for.
I'm gonna email everybody with a game plan, and I'm gonna email you some attachments. Okay?
Okay.
Okay, thanks everybody. See ya.
See you
All right.
later.
Bye.
Bye.